evening. Thank you, Philip. It's a delight to be here. It's wonderful to be part of this convergence, as it were. People talk about convergence in economic growth, but this is a convergence of two cities, a convergence of New York and a convergence of Abu Dhabi. Thank you for hosting us. We're delighted to be a part of this series at the NYU Abu Dhabi Institute. And in particular, we're very excited about tonight's lecture. At the Stern School, we really pride ourselves on anticipating where the future is going. Not predicting the future, it's impossible to predict the future, but we can be educated about the range of possibilities that the future holds. And in particular, we say to our students that our mission at the Stern School is really to generate people and ideas that transform problems into opportunities to create value for business and society. And so really, problems are just opportunities being viewed incorrectly. And tonight's lecture, the completing the Urbanization project by colleague Paul Romer, is a great example of something which could be used as a problem or something which can be viewed as an opportunity. Over the next century, 3 to 5 billion people are going to be moving into cities around the world. And we're very fortunate tonight to have Paul Romer, who is the Henry Kaufman Visiting Professor at NYU Stern this year, and a senior fellow of the Stanford Institute of Economic Policy Research to talk about what the future holds and what it might hold in terms of cities. Just a little bit of background about Paul. Paul really needs no introduction. But he has to say he's led an extraordinarily distinguished academic career would be an understatement. He first made his mark in the 1980s as one of the founders of what's known as modern growth theory. He went on to win a number of distinguished awards, which I won't give you a laundry list of those. But then in the early 2000s, Paul wasn't satisfied with just being a superstar academic. He actually decided, and again, this is a good example of turning a problem into an opportunity, as a way to re-engage or further engage the students in his MBA classes at Stanford. He started a software company, which he then sold off. So he's also a very successful entrepreneur. And now in sort of the third phase of his academic career, or career, if you will, it's much broader than just being an academic. Paul is now turning his ample intellectual skills to the problems of urbanization. And tonight, he's going to share with us his thoughts on completing the Urbanization project. I give you Paul Romer.
It's a pleasure to be back in Abu Dhabi. It's my second time here. For anybody who's interested in cities, it's a wonderful data point to add to the other cities that you know around the world. I can't help mentioning, as I listened to Peter, I decided what you need to call the school strategy is the Gretzky strategy. Because when Wayne Gretzky, who was one of the best hockey players ever, described what he did, he always skated to where the puck was going to be. And nobody knows how he knew where the puck was going to be, but the Stern School is going to skate towards where the future is going to be. So my topic tonight is completing the Urbanization project. The term the Urbanization project is one that I learned from a colleague at NYU who's in the public policy school. What it describes is a kind of a grand venture that humans started about 10,000 years ago, and that by one measure we're about halfway through. What that means in the simplest sense is if you think about the way humans used to live, these were Plains Indians in North America. These are similar nomads from Finland. What's happened is humans shifted from living in conditions like this to moving either to conditions like this. This is a slum in Jakarta, or to conditions like this. This is a panorama of the place where I did most of my educational training and some of my early career work, the city of Chicago. So we're about halfway through this project of moving from dispersed forager, hunter-gatherer conditions or nomadic conditions into these dense urban agglomerations. in the sense that we're halfway there in the sense that 3 billion people roughly live in cities now out of about 6 to 6.5 billion people worldwide. And the most interesting and challenging and in some ways exciting part of this project is that we will complete it almost surely in this century. And what that will mean is that more people will move into cities than in all of human history up until now, in the last 10,000 years. So we'll complete it, but we'll complete it in an extraordinary rush or bang. The reason it'll be 3 to 5 billion people is that, of course, the population will continue to grow. Best estimates are that it'll stabilize at about 9 billion people. And if we converge on something like a 70 to 80% urbanization rate, which is quite plausible, then we could easily get above the 3 billion people, and it's quite possible that that urbanization rate will be even higher than 70 to 80%. So we're in some sense the last dash in this extraordinary program. The scale of this challenge is hard to appreciate. If you think about infrastructure investment for 3 to 5 billion people, or just think about all the infrastructure that we've built so far in history, and think about duplicating that. This can seem like a frightening project, but as Peter said, it's really an extraordinary opportunity. I'll try and persuade you that it's actually an opportunity that's truly unique in human history, that we can do something in this century that humans could never have done before and will never have a chance to do in the future. Now, this is different from some of the things that I've thought about and policy issues I and many others have worked on. In many things, you can see how what's going on in this century is much better than what's gone on for years before that. That they say that economic growth in this century is more than during the previous 1,000 years. But we can predict that we'll have economic growth rates that are even higher in the next century than in the current. So you have this kind of acceleration and improvement, but this process keeps on going. The urbanization project is different. There is an extraordinary surge of urbanization, which we're going to go through this century, and then in the lifetimes of children who are now alive, in their lifetimes, we'll complete this project, it'll be done, and we'll henceforth never again have the opportunity that we have this century. To anticipate some questions about the feasibility of this, could this go as fast as I suggest? Let me show you, one of the great things about urbanizations, there's so many visuals that you can see. Let me show you some pictures about growth in Shenzhen, which is a new city which grew up in Guangdong, very close to Hong Kong. So it's just north of Hong Kong in the picture here. This is a picture from 1990 of the Shenzhen area. The line connecting these two smaller towns is about 45 kilometers, so you can see the scale. At the bottom of the figure, you can see that there is some urban area that's built up next to the yellow line at the very bottom, which is the border with Hong Kong. But then if you move ahead just 10 years from 1990 to 2000, you see this extraordinary filling in of the urban area around Shenzhen. In 20 years, it grew from almost nothing into more than 10 million people. So we can urbanize very quickly, and we can urbanize in ways which don't have to look like Jakarta, that slum in Jakarta, even in a country like China that starts out being relatively poor. So the skyline in Shenzhen doesn't look all that different from the skyline in Chicago. So we want to think about this as a chance to do something rapidly and well if we make the right choices, but recognize that we might also do it poorly, offer a lower quality of life if we have urbanization looks more like the building more of the slums that we saw in Jakarta. Now, one problem with thinking about urbanization and something this big is we tend to lose the human dimension to this process. In those pictures of the nomads, you can see the people, you can see their faces. When you look at these cities, the aerial maps or the skylines, you never see the people. So I want to give you pictures of two people that we'll keep in mind as we go through the talk, so we'll understand what it means to go through this process. The first person is someone I referred to. I don't know him, but I referred to him with a name that I made up, Nelson. He's the young man in the green shirt in this picture. I gave a talk on that's now on the web at a site called TED using this picture, and I talked about Nelson and raised a puzzle about life for Nelson. He's doing his homework under streetlights in his hometown near the airport, and he's doing this along with his colleagues because they don't have electricity at home. And so one of the questions is, why doesn't somebody like Nelson have access to electricity at home? When electricity is a 100-year-old technology, the electricity, the dynamo, the wires, the light bulb. So why is it that there are people like Nelson who don't have electricity at home? And what does the urbanization project mean for someone like Nelson? I want to suggest a second person now, Enrique. This is a picture that was taken to illustrate a book called Enrique's Story, which I can strongly recommend to everyone. Enrique was about, I think he was 7 years old, living in Honduras when his mother left to go to the United States to get a job. She was gone for 10 years, so when he was 17, he decided to try and ride the railroads through Mexico up to the United States to go see his mother. And the book tells the story of what happens to him on his journey as he tries to get to the United States. So we'll talk about Nelson and Enrique and urbanization, how urbanization could affect their lives. Now the first question we have to ask about this urbanization project is why are humans doing this? Then the second question we'll come to is, how do we want to go about it? What choices do we make that influence the process? But let's start with why. In the deepest sense, urbanization is a very good illustration of the general process that economists study that we refer to as creating value. Humans can do things that create value in the sense that the world in one configuration, or the physical objects in one configuration, or social systems arrangements, those in one configuration can be much more valuable to us than in another configuration. We typically use a monetary value to quantify those differences, but really what's at stake here is creating conditions that give us more satisfaction in a deep sense. Now, one illustration of this process of creating value is illustrated in this picture. This picture shows the value of land, so the value of undeveloped land in various locations in New York City. And the puzzle that this should pose for all of us, we get used to data like this and we don't stop to ask, what is it that makes a piece of land in Manhattan worth $15,000 per square meter, or even more, $50,000 per square meter? The land itself is exactly the same as it was 200 or 300 years ago when no one lived there. Nothing about the land has changed, but the land is now many orders of magnitude more valuable than it once was. This land is valuable, of course, because it's a place that people will pay a very high rent on so that they can be around lots of other people who are paying high rents. And why is that? Well, we get enormous value out of interacting with other people. Everything we do as humans, except for agriculture and extraction of minerals, everything else we do is more productive, more satisfying, more rewarding, more effective in a context where we can interact with lots of other people. And that interaction could take place sometimes through the internet, sometimes through long-distance trade in goods, but a large quantity, a very important fraction of that interaction takes place by living in a very dense setting in very close proximity to many other people. So a sign of the value, the human satisfaction and value we get from grouping together in cities rather than being dispersed all over the world is the very high rents that we're willing to pay on land that happens to be in a place where lots of other people want to be. Now, you can dig a little deeper about these benefits. What kinds of benefits do we get from living in a bigger city? There's some data now which shows the following kind of fact when you look across cities. If you took cities of a size 10,000, and suppose we had 1,000 of those, so that we had a total population of 10 million people, and suppose we imagined hypothetically that instead of living in those 1,000 smaller cities, they grouped together in a single city of 10 million people, what difference would that make? One very simple difference has to do with just the physics of wiring things up. The amount of copper cable that it takes to connect everybody to an electrical grid so they can have electricity at home, the kind of electricity that Nelson doesn't have, the amount of copper wire it takes is 60% less in a city of 10 million people than in 1,000 different cities of 10,000 people. And that doesn't even count the wire you'd have to use to connect those different cities with each other. That assumes you could have electrical generation within the cities themselves. So there's efficiencies of density which turn out fortuitously to be efficiencies that are very, very good for the planet. We use less energy, we use less materials, we use less energy, we emit less carbon in very dense cities. And the bigger a city tends to be, the denser it tends to be. So there are just very direct benefits from living together in this way. Let me illustrate another way in which we benefit from living in a big city. The lines in this picture illustrate the flight paths, and the darker the line, or the more, actually the brighter the line, the more aircraft travel along that route. And if you look close to cities, you can actually see the approach paths that these planes tend to fly along. What you can immediately see from this picture is that there's an advantage to living close to a bunch of other people, because if you do, you'll live close to a major airport, and then if you're in a major airport, you can get direct flights to all the other major hubs around the United States. So an advantage of living in a place like Denver, which is the airport close to the center of this picture, compared to living out in Nebraska, farther to the east, is that you can share with all the other people who live in Denver the use of the airport. And it's good to share it because you don't use it every day. You don't fly to every city every day, but every so often you need to get on a plane, fly somewhere to meet someone. And living in a big city makes that much easier to do. As these cities that we have around the world connect up with each other more and more through air travel, we get the benefits of face-to-face interaction, not just with all the people in the city we're in, but after a short flight, we can get face-to-face interaction with anybody in any city in a reasonable distance away from us in a hub. So we've scaled the benefits of face-to-face interaction from just the people in our city to those people in comparable cities. But it's important that we all live within a relatively short drive of an airport. This is leading to a shift in our notion of what we used to call optimal city size. We used to think that you could get most of the advantages of a city by living in a city of 1 million, a couple million people. But now, in a city that's 10 million or 20 million, at a given level of average income, you're going to have many more flights to different destinations, so the ease with which you can interact with lots of people all over the world goes up with the size of the city in which you live. And this is a phenomenon which shows up not just in interactions amongst people, but also in the movement of goods around the world. Something like 40% of the value of the goods that are traded internationally now travel by airplane. Now, this is not by weight or volume. The vast majority of the weight and bulk travels on ships, but the very expensive goods now move by airplanes. So if you want to make the transition from, say, being in the garment assembly business as an emerging market into, say, the business of assembling iPods or iPads, it's essential that your factory be very close to a major airport, because those goods are going to travel on airplanes to their ultimate destinations. So for movements of people and movements of goods, being in close proximity to an airport that's a major hub airport is going to be increasingly important. Now, what does it take to support something like air travel? So I'm starting to make the shift now beyond just why do we group together, but how do we group together? How are we going to urbanize? Well, one thing it takes is a hardscape, some infrastructure. This is the picture, because it's the place I grew up and know well, this is the picture of the airport in Denver. It was also the most recently constructed airport in the United States. The outlined figure in the white is the site of the Denver airport. If we zoom in on that, you can see, you can get a sense for the total runway space and the total land they've reserved for this airport. The surface area within this boundary is 120 square kilometers. So it's a quite significant piece of land. And the plan is that this will, as air travel grows and air cargo grows, this will become a critical hub in the entire Rocky Mountain region or center part of the United States. So you need some changes to the hardscape if you're going to have city life or if you're going to have the specific benefits of changes of travel by airplanes. But there's something else that you need as well. This is another visual representation of how the airport hub cities around the world connect up with each other. Each of these little dots represents a plane flying at a particular time of day during one 24-hour period. You can see lots of planes taking off from Europe right now. You see nighttime come to the United States. You see a whole flock of planes leave North America for Europe. So you can infer something about where the hubs are and the travel patterns that people engage in. You can also infer something about the level of income in different parts of the world. Because at higher levels of income, higher levels of skill, more complex economic activity, there's more air travel. And you can see parts of the world which are not, like Africa, which are still lagging behind the rest of the world in the sense that they're just not connected to this international hub of air travel. This, of course, is a point which is very familiar to people in this region because Dubai was one of the early cities where they recognized the importance of the airport in joining the worldwide hub. And if you look carefully, you can see some of the traffic coming from Europe down through this region and then connecting on into Asia. Now, what does it take to make this kind of system work? It takes that hardscape where the planes land and take off and the hardware of the planes themselves, but it also takes a very intricate set of rules to make sure that these planes get sequenced as they land and take off, that they don't crash into each other. This system operates remarkably efficiently and remarkably safely, given the complexity of what we're doing, but it takes a very complicated set of rules to make it work. So this is the way to think about, I think, what a city is. A city is both hardscape, the stuff we pay attention to, but also a set of rules about how people interact with each other. And as a city gets bigger, as it gets denser, and as technologies change, the rules you need in a city will change over time. Now, for a long time, and still in many parts of intellectual discourse, people have viewed cities with great suspicion. They have failed to appreciate these benefits that I was pointing to, and people have pointed instead to the dangers of cities. So why is it that we were afraid of them? Well, when we first moved together, we didn't have the right rules, the new rules you needed in dense settings. So this meant that initially cities were places that were very unhealthy. If you bring a lot of people into close proximity with each other, they can exchange bugs much more easily. And without appropriate health measures and public sanitation measures, cities will be very dangerous places to live, and they were for quite a long time. But we've made some technological advances, like discovery of vaccines and antibiotics, but also made changes in terms of rules that insist on things like that every dwelling have a hookup to the sewer system. At least in the successful cities like Shenzhen or Chicago, although not always in the slum like the one I showed you in Jakarta. We also need rules to control crime. Crime is an incredibly important issue to manage when you bring people in close proximity to each other, especially people who are anonymous, who don't know each other. So the usual mechanisms about reputation within a small community don't guarantee good behavior. Part of the story of Enrique trying to get through Mexico to the United States is that he gets, his money gets taken from him. He gets beaten up and robbed by some bandits in Mexico, but also by some of the police in Mexico. So the system of law that stops violence is not present in many parts of the world. It's not present in some cities as well. So if we don't put in place the rules that prevent crime, life can be very dangerous and unpleasant. Another more familiar problem for those of us who live in relatively well-managed cities is congestion. That if you bring that many people together, 10 million people in a high-density setting, it takes a pretty elaborate set of rules to make sure that they just don't get in each other's way. Think about the rules for traffic in a traffic intersection with a stoplight, for example. Originally, in lower density settings, the only rule you needed was don't go when the light is red. As density goes up, you have to get better rules that that keep people from blocking the intersection. So it's not only don't drive through the stoplight when it's red, but it's don't even enter the intersection unless you can be sure you can leave while the light is green. So the rules have to change as density goes up, and you've got to have some way to enforce those rules, or you'll end up with gridlock. That at each intersection, cars stopped in the intersection will block cars that are trying to go the other way, and the entire grid of streets can become locked. So we need rules that are changing as we're building all this hardscape and as people are moving into these cities. The problem is that it's hard to change rules. When we get a set of rules established someplace, they tend to persist for long periods of time. One kind of visual metaphor I think that's very helpful here is think about the rules that manage something like a soccer game. The rules for resolving ties, or the rules for preventing behavior that could be risky for the players. It's very difficult to change the rules in the middle of the game, because at any given point, a change in the rules will advantage some, disadvantage others, and it's also hard to do in the middle of play. So think of cities or air traffic as these elaborate games that are being played according to a set of rules, and more people keep joining the game, but it's very difficult to change those rules. The one kind of setting where we can change rules is where you create a brand new playing field, and then you see if anybody wants to come and join the game. This, I think, is a very important and very general characteristic of social interaction when you bring people together. When we create a startup, and that could be a startup firm or a startup city, you have a chance to start with some brand new rules that are different from the ones people are familiar with. They leave the game they've been playing, they come to a new game, and if these new rules are better in a new context, you get a shift from less efficient rules to better rules. The startups will sometimes experiment with rules. Some startups won't succeed, but others may succeed. They may do something very different. And then eventually, they may even persuade the people who are playing the games in all of the existing places that it's worth the trouble it takes to stop, halt play for a while, change the rules, and then keep going again, because somebody in one of these startups has actually demonstrated the benefits of the new rules. So the opportunity that we have at a time where we're going to build an enormous number of living spaces for humans on the planet is to create many entirely new cities, as opposed to living with the cities we have or just expanding them, just adding more players to the games that are being played in all of the existing cities. And this is this opportunity which we won't have, future generations won't have, future centuries will not be able to do. But at a time when 3 to 5 billion people are going to move into cities, we have the choice of saying, let's just grow the size of the existing ones, or let's build some entirely new ones with different kinds of rules. So when I said in the beginning, how is it that we're going to urbanize? I think this turns very critically on a decision that as a society or societies we haven't thought about very much, which is what are the advantages of starting entirely new cities as opposed to letting the ones we have grow, whether that's letting Chicago grow or letting Jakarta grow. Now, at this point, it's worth dwelling for a moment on the kinds of rules that matter in a city. Sometimes there are standards that are established that are like the power standard or the standards of road traffic, more subtle standards of density and the way people tend to live or the transport patterns that they use. So when we start new cities, we could conceivably start different standards. To give a not very interesting example, if we found that it would be better to switch to, say, a higher voltage standard for electricity or a different frequency for electricity, you could do that in a new city. It would be very hard to do within an existing city because as you add to the existing city, everybody wants to hook up to the existing electrical grid, so you have to just continue with the standards that have already been set. But in a new city, you could change all of that. And there are several forces in the world right now which mean that it might be useful to come up with some new standards. One general set of changes is in the cost of information technology. The price of storing a bit of information or transmitting that bit, manipulating it, has gone down by many orders of magnitude. And we see in our own personal lives how much that's changed what we do. We see in corporate settings significant change in how corporate organizations are structured. But very little of that is percolated into the governance of cities and the rules that we use within cities. And if one started with a brand new city, one could use IT in ways that could be efficiency enhancing and dramatically improve the quality of life. One example might be much more detailed monitoring of the locations of automobiles, so that if you happen to end up blocking the box in one of those intersections because you entered before you could be sure you could leave, there could be a computer program that notes that you were blocking the box for 37 seconds when the light was red in your direction, and then you could get a bill at the end of the month for $17 as your fine for blocking the box. This would both save on the human resources, the substantial human resources that are used to try and police traffic laws. It would let us enforce existing traffic laws, like not blocking the box, much more efficiently. It would let us even use different kinds of rules about time of day pricing, congestion pricing, so that we don't have these peaks of congestion at particular times during the day. So this kind of arrangement would be relatively easy to put in place in a brand new city and see if people want to come live under those new rules. They might not like feeling like the traffic laws are so closely surveilling them, but on the other hand, they might find that the fines are very small for the occasional times when you break the law, and that it's actually very good to live in a place where it's always easy to get around. You never have to get stuck in a traffic jam. They might also find that there's a solution to the kind of problem that's very acute in this region, that the way you drive changes when you're being monitored, and the number of traffic fatalities go down, so that an enormous number of human lives could be saved if we reduce traffic fatalities to the kinds of low levels that we know are possible. So IT is one example of a change in a technology that would let us put in place very different rules in new cities. And it's much more likely that we'll try these rules in a new city than in existing ones. We had a little bit of movement towards pricing of access to streets in Singapore, London, Stockholm, but it's extraordinarily difficult to get people persuaded to make this kind of change in the rules. Other reasons why we might change how our cities are organized: energy prices may go up, the cost of emitting carbon may be higher in the future. So we might reconfigure density patterns and transport patterns. We may also face more serious issues about rising sea levels and bigger risk of storm surge or tsunamis, as we've just learned. So new cities might be designed in ways that make them less vulnerable to those kinds of threats, or perhaps put in locations where those threats are less serious. And the cities could also, these new cities could also create an opportunity for us to take rules that already work well in the best cities around the world and make them available to people who currently live without those rules in a place like Jakarta, where we have simple rules for how to enforce sanitation laws with sewer hookups, but those aren't enforced in Jakarta. They could change the risk of crime that somebody like Enrique faced when he was in Honduras or when he made the trip to North America. At least within a city he lives, where he lives, he might face less crime. And it might even be possible to create a new city someplace where Enrique could go, or his mother could have gone, where instead of traveling that long, perilous trip through Mexico, they could go someplace close by. And Enrique's mother, when she went there, could have taken him with her. Well, this foreshadows a project that I'm now involved in with the government of Honduras, which is to take this idea of entirely new cities literally and to say, let's build an entirely new city on land that's unoccupied on the Caribbean coast of Honduras. This is land the government owns. At one time, it was a banana plantation. So it's not virgin rainforest. To zoom in just a bit, you can see that there's a river valley that's traced out here along with a coastline, and it's a potential site here. If you get another representation of this, you can see the topographic lines more easily, and get a sense for what's really a remarkably attractive valley leading out to the Caribbean coast. To give you just one more tease about this spot, this is a picture of the valley looking out towards the Caribbean. So what the government of Honduras has decided is to pick a site like this that would be large enough at typical densities for modern cities to hold about 10 million people, and to make it possible to build a new city here of that many people. Now, Honduras has a population of only about 8 million people within its borders, another million that now live in the United States. So they're not going to get to a city of 10 million people just with their own residents. The plan is to make this a city which is open to people from throughout Central America, or even all of Latin America. If you ask, are there enough people that would want to move to a city like this? Well, think again about all of those people like Enrique and his mom who currently incur enormous costs and risks to go live someplace, typically the United States, where they can't have legal residence, and they typically it's much harder to bring your families. The numbers of those people is quite large. About 1 million people a year were migrating to the United States from Latin America up until the time of the most recent financial crisis. It's moderated a little bit since then. And the vast majority of those go without legal residency. So if a new city attracted just them, it could get to 10 million people in 10 years. And if you think back of those pictures about growth in Shenzhen, it's not inconceivable that you could build out a city with the hardscape you need for 10 million people within 10 or 20 years. Now, who would pay for this? How would we afford it? Let me step back for just a second and pose an obviously false crisis for you. The world has to provide food for 6 billion people in the next week, or we'll have massive starvation all around the world. So that sounds like a crisis. Like, how are we going to urbanize? How are we going to get food in the hands of 6 billion people in the next week? in the right amounts. Now we know how we solve that kind of problem. We rely on mutually beneficial exchange. All kinds of people work together effectively, seeking their own benefit under systems of rules that mean that the pursuit of individual benefit leads to mutual benefit. So that same kind of strategy with the right rules can lead to the provision of cities, just like it can lead to the provision of food. Think back to the increases in the value of the land in New York City I pointed to. If you think about building a new city in Honduras as a real estate development project, land that the government is willing to contribute at essentially no cost to this venture could suddenly become worth tens, hundreds, thousands of dollars per square meter. And this site is more than 1,000 square kilometers. So if you do the math, the gain that you can create and capture as rent is enormous if you succeeded extremely well and created a place that was as vibrant as New York City. You're likely not to succeed quite at that level, but still, the gain that can be created is enormous here. Those gains in the value of the land can pay for investments like the policing services, the public health services, basic education, all the things that make a city an attractive place for people to go. So it can pay for the enforcement of the rules. You're going to also have to pay for the hardscape. Somebody's got to build the airport, somebody's got to build the port, the housing structures for people. But people are willing to pay. They pay rent for a building as well as rent for the land. They pay for a ticket on an airplane, which includes a landing fee that can pay a return to the entity that operates the airport. When a container comes off a ship, they pay a loading and unloading charge, which can pay a return to the entity which develops the port. The roads could be invested in by private entities, and there could be charges for those cars that have those sensors that tell where they go. There could be fees that pay for even something like the roads that we've always assumed the government has to provide in the past. So Honduras, which does not have the financial capacity to go out and borrow and build roads, build the airport, build the port for 10 million people, doesn't have to build a city here. All it has to do is help create the conditions with the rules that will reward investors in infrastructure, that will keep the place safe, that will let millions of people come in and bring their families and live together safely. And the interesting kind of initiative, the really innovative thing that the government is doing there is asking, what would it take to create new rules here in this startup sense? They've already amended their constitution to create something that's like a provision in the Chinese constitution that was called a special administrative region. This is how China incorporated Hong Kong within its legal system. Honduras has created what they call a special development region, where the rules can be completely different from the rules in the rest of Honduras. And they're anticipating that they can form partnerships with other governments who could come in and help, either in an outsourced sense, help provide, say, the kinds of policing services that some governments have gotten good at providing. They could provide other kinds of services. The Privy Council in England has a sub-council called the Judicial Council. It acts as the court of final appeal on judicial decisions for judicial systems in other parts of the world, other countries that typically had a colonial link with England or were members of the Commonwealth. Rwanda has just joined the Commonwealth, and I believe its court decisions will now be subject to an appeal to the Privy Council. It's possible in principle that a new judicial system in this zone in Honduras could have that same possibility of appeal to the Privy Council, so that you could get almost instantly a kind of credibility to the judicial system and an independence of the judicial system from the executive that administers this jurisdiction. So that instead of thinking in the way we've often thought about rules as something that have to emerge from inside, we can treat rules a bit the way we treat technology now and say, geez, if somebody's already invented antibiotics or vaccines or chips, it'd be silly for us in a city to try and reinvent all of those technologies. Let's just bring in the technologies that already exist so we can get best practice technologically very quickly. In the same way, governments like the government of Honduras that are willing to be innovative can create startup areas where rules like the judgment and credibility and independence of the Privy Council can be brought in very quickly. And with those kinds of assurances, they anticipate that they'll be able to induce the kind of investment in infrastructure that's the critical bottleneck in getting a project like this off the road. This is a project which has been moving very quickly. They amended the Constitution in January and February. I went on a trip with members of the Honduran government to Singapore and South Korea, which are two places where there are large consortia that see city building as the economic opportunity of the century. I was describing it as the social opportunity for the world, but it's also an enormous business opportunity for the consortia and groups that get there first. These are two places that are already thinking about it. They had been focusing primarily on the market in China, but they're now realizing that there could be comparable markets all over the world if governments like the government in Honduras can prepare the site. So I hope to come back to Abu Dhabi a year from now, I think it's been about a year since the last time I was here, and report on the progress on this project. But I think it shows enormous potential to change the lives of somebody like Enrique and his mom. They could have gone someplace, instead of having to go to Los Angeles, go someplace nearby, be legal residents, live in a place that's safe, go back and forth to their other family members that are close by. Give them security in a region which right now is plagued by insecurity. So this could have enormous local benefits, but it could show the entire world how we can take advantage of this option of creating startup cities if we're willing to be innovative in setting up the formal systems of governance that create the kinds of overall meta rules that will then let the detailed rules evolve in the local context. And this will be good in ways that go very deep into the whole concept of progress for humans. Where it could take us is to what I think our goal should be, or the goal should be during the lifetime of those young children I referred to before. We should end up as soon as possible in a position where every family, like Enrique's family, has a choice about moving to several different cities that are all trying to attract more residents. That could be the single goal, I claim, that drives all of our thinking about development. Now, many people in the world, like Enrique's family, have very limited options to even move to a single city that would want them. Most of them go to the United States to get to a city like this. Many people throughout the world, in India, for example, have no cities they can go to that are trying to attract new residents because the existing cities have bad rules, they can't expand their infrastructure, they're trying to keep people away. The reason people end up living in slums in a place like Jakarta is that there's no legal development where they could move to because the governments are typically trying to keep people away from the existing cities. But if we built lots of new cities, if 10 million people is the unit, if we built 100 of those or 300 of those, and each one of those is trying to compete to become the place with the hub airport, the place that's the vibrant place where people want to come and live, the place that's safe, the place that offers opportunity, the place that's healthy, the place that's not congested. If all of these cities were competing along these lines, the people who now don't have choices about even a single city that wants to attract them will end up with a handful, maybe dozens that are competing for them. This will give them access to the modern market economy. It'll connect them into those networks that you could see with the air travel. But it will also be progressive in deeper ways. If you look back in the United States, in our history, where did we get things that we now think of as real progress, like equal rights for women? So women could own property, or women could vote, or equality of all citizens. This tended to come in the new territories that were opening up, not the original colonies, but the new territories that opened up that we're competing for more people, not just by being attractive in an economic sense, but being more open, more progressive, and offering a better total quality of life. So this kind of competition will be very beneficial for the people right now who don't have choices. So we'll have a once in a planet, not just once in a lifetime, but a once in a planet choice, opportunity to create dozens, maybe hundreds of new cities. The competition between those cities could completely transform the imbalance right now between billions of people who want to go to cities and virtually no places that want to accept those people. If there were hundreds of cities competing for all those people, hundreds of cities that know that the bigger they get, the more value they'll be able to offer all of those citizens, the competition will lead to much faster economic growth. It will benefit the planet because it will reduce our footprint all over the earth. It'll free up lots of land that we now settle very densely. But best of all, we'll put in place rules that are truly attractive to the people that come. So instead of coming without legal status, as they do to the United States, or going as temporary migrants, as they do to many cities around the world, where they can't bring their families, they're treated as a different caste almost of people in a society. Instead of being treated that way, there will be cities that commit to inclusion, to equal protection under the law, and that are the places that are viewed as the ones that give true opportunity for satisfaction for the people who don't have it now. So, as I said, I hope I'll come back in a year, tell you about progress in Honduras, and perhaps tell you about the next city that's about to get started, and maybe even the next. And we'll watch city startups take on the kind of capture our imaginations in the way that firm startups have done in the last couple decades. Thanks.
Yes. There's one problem with the project, as you put it, as being, if I perceive what you're saying correctly, that it's an issue of whether we develop new urban centers or we expand the existing urban centers. Yeah. The reason why the existing urban centers are expanding is because of the fact that they have been in existence, and they're very attractive. If you take a place like New York City, people want to live there. I want to live there. I would live there if there was the economic possibility of doing that. But I know that I couldn't get the kind of a job there that I have here. There's certainly the earning power that I have there to live in New York City. Simply, and that's what's preventing me from doing that. But that doesn't prevent other people. If we take an example of an area that is supplying a lot of the people who have migrated to New York City, this is Puerto Rico, Puerto Ricans. Large population of Puerto Ricans migrated to New York City in the middle of the 20th century. Yeah. Now they had an urban center. They have San Juan in Puerto Rico, but nobody moved to San Juan and developed that urban area because New York City just simply was much more attractive in terms of both socially and economically. And so I think that's the problem that we're facing, that as attractive as the idea is of wanting to start up new alternative urban areas, the fact of the matter is that why urbanization happens in the first place is because people are attracted to a particular urban area. And it's very difficult to say, okay, like in the case of Honduras, all right, let's start a new urban center here, because there's nothing attractive about that unless you can promise that, it will be, as you had said earlier, it would be as vibrant, it would be as culturally stimulating, and as economically promising as an area like New York City. Yeah. So Anyway, I don't know if there was really a question there. It's so much a comment.
It's a very useful kind of pointer to some important issues. Part of what you're referring to is what economists call increasing returns or agglomeration or a positive feedback loop, which means that if the average quality of life is better in a bigger place, the natural tendency is for all the people to want to go to the biggest existing place. And so that is something that you have to overcome to create entirely new cities, and you're exactly right about that. That does mean that, imagine that the United States, or take Europe, for example. Suppose Europe has no growth in population and doesn't let any new migrants in. That means it'll be very difficult to start an entirely new city in Europe, because you'd be competing with all of the existing ones, and that's a hard thing to do. The thing that's different in the developing world is that you have this population that's this underserved market. You know, there's 3 to 5 billion people who want to go to a city right now, and there's no place that will let them in and treat them with equality and inclusion. So if you have this enormous underserved market and you create a new site and say, you know, 10 million or so people could show up here, it's hard to appreciate how many people would be interested in that possibility. As I said, 1 million people a year right now leave Latin America to go to the United States illegally, typically without legal status, and often at great risk to get there. So I suspect you'd get a much bigger flow if you had a safe place that would let people in and give them legal status. So the difficulty of competing with a big successful place that you point to is true in a stable, built-out kind of world. And that may be the world that we face once this urbanization project is over. But right now, we have this unique situation of 3 to 5 billion people who can't find a single city that is trying to recruit them. So in those circumstances, you build a city that will recruit them, I promise you it'll populate very quickly. But the one thing that does make this a little bit of a daunting challenge is it wouldn't have been wise for the Hondurans to say, well, let's start with 10 square kilometers or 50 square kilometers and see if we could build a city of 100,000 people. That's just a lot less attractive proposition. So what they have to be willing to do here is make a bet in terms of a very big site and commit that we're going to get to a very big scale. And as long as everybody sees that that's possible, it becomes possible, and you can get a node that becomes an important hub in this worldwide system. So you have to be willing to think big, but in today's world, if you think big, you can build a city from scratch and develop it very quickly.
Just a curiosity, really. I mean,
sorry,
okay. Can you hear me now? Let's call it art of developing city or building new cities is something which is a well-known history along all the history of humanity, of theorizing, of writing how to do it. Mm-hmm. Especially in the last 200 years, we know many new cities have been built around the world, many new models have been tested. A lot of them have been just big flops. So I just wanted to ask you, what do you think, in your opinion, was the big lesson learned on these experience that we have now? Mm-hmm. And how would you apply that lesson learned in your 10 million big city?
Yeah. So the analogy between firms and cities is, I think, is a very productive one for this purpose. And numerically, most startup firms fail too. But the few firms that succeed generate so much value that it's very healthy and productive to have startups. So we shouldn't measure success by saying our criteria for success shouldn't be that we never have cities which fail, but it should be that we have some cities which succeed and take off. So that's the first point. The second point is that there's a clear lesson that we've learned in both the management of the economy as a whole and the management of the city, which is that too much central planning can be a very bad thing. that much more decentralized decision-making based on this pursuit of mutually beneficial exchange tends to lead to much richer, more vibrant, a little bit more chaotic, but attractive places to live. So just as we've learned, you can't have an effective, vibrant economy through central planning, we've also learned that you need a much lighter touch in urban planning. And then to the extent that you plan, you want to have different people that are competing, like different developers of neighborhoods that are competing for residents and that are attuned to the market. You know, one of the problems with central planning is that academics and bureaucrats would exert their kind of preferences over this is what we think a city should be like, instead of having development organizations that say, what is it that the market wants? How do people want to live? So with more market-like mechanisms where you allow different things to happen in different places, you don't try and plan what kind of activity happens in every single place, where you let different market entities try and compete to attract people to different areas, I think the probability of a successful city is much higher than it was with the few new cities we've seen in the past, where those new cities were almost always a big government project, often for a new capital, driven by a kind of a political or bureaucratic imperative, rather than one which said, hey, there's a huge underserved market here, how could we go out and serve the market?
In your ideal vision with these new cities, where do these cities in the United States, such as Buffalo and Detroit, and Gary, Indiana, and Indianapolis, and I'm just with the letter I mean, one can go on and on, of these once prosperous cities that fulfilled a certain market that attracted a lot of people at one point, but now are basically bankrupt. Does your vision, if it is applied to the United States, would it further eviscerate these cities? Or would it help them?
So this is a question, in some sense, from my perspective, when I think about Enrique and Nelson, I'm not worried about having too many cities. You know, the problem right now is we don't have enough. And we don't have enough that have reasonable rules so that you can actually run an electrical system there and people can be safe. But it is an interesting question for the United States, for Europe, and this world we're going to have to live in, or our grandchildren will have to live in, after we've built all the existing cities. In that kind of world, if a place like New York attracts more and more people, it will typically come at the expense of some other place. So you'll see cities that attract more people and become more and more successful. You'll see other cities that decline. And that's, I think, a sign of the way it should be. It's just like our goal is not to make sure that firms last forever. Our goal is to make sure that people have a higher standard of living. Firms can come and go. They'll start, they'll thrive, they'll sometimes go completely out of business and go bankrupt. That's fine, because the people keep moving around and their quality of life keeps getting better. So our metric should be what's happening to average standards of living, not is a particular city getting into trouble. And one of the things that will happen is that some cities will be better at putting in place the kinds of rules that make it an attractive place to live, and others will be worse at it. And the right solution is to let people leave the places that are not as well governed. So both Detroit and New York City were suffering from budget deficits and very high levels of crime in the 1970s. People thought both of them were going to collapse. New York went through a kind of a transition so that it's now started to attract more and more people. Detroit did not. Its crime problems got worse and worse. And as long as Detroit can't reduce crime, it makes sense for everybody to leave Detroit. The only mechanism that I think we might want to add in the United States or in society as a whole is something like a bankruptcy mechanism, where when a city government has fixed assets like the roads and the sewer system that are still valuable, but they haven't been able to put in place just the basic rules that mean that you can be safe living there, you might want to have some kind of a bankruptcy procedure that can come in and do a turnaround, change the governance, change the rules, take those existing physical assets and see if they can be used more productively. And New York City went through a kind of bankruptcy-like proceeding when New York State took over and imposed a financial control board. So the short answer is that for Enrique and Nelson, this is not the problem for the next 100 years. But in the United States and in the world as a whole in the future, eventually we'll want to have something like a bankruptcy mechanism. But we're still going to want to make it that everybody can leave when a place gets unattractive.
For those mega cities you're referring to, you're hoping that those cities would offer a lot to the newcomers. But do you have, like for Enrique and his mother, instead of getting on the death train to go to the United States, they would go there.
Yeah.
But do you have any expectations from the newcomers to offer to the new city? I mean, there are like 3 to 5 billion people coming from rural areas, underprivileged backgrounds. They have nothing to offer. So what kind of city would that be with maybe peasants or people coming from rural areas? In New York City, it's a great city because you have Broadway, you have MoMA, you have Wall Street, and people contribute and they have a lot to offer to all of this. But in these cities, what do they have to offer? What happens?
So this is a very good question. To the extent that we've seen new city development that wasn't, say, a national capital. Think of Dubai, which really was a pioneer in this. Those were cities which were catering for the most skilled, the most affluent residents. So we kind of have a vision of, well, what would it be like to be in the city building business if that was our market? It's kind of like in the automobile business, it's like, okay, if we were going to make Ferraris, what should they look like? And we could sell a few of those, and we kind of know how to be in the Ferrari business in the sense of cities. What we need is to rethink, well, what's the kind of business that's like the Model T, the inexpensive car that was available to everyone? What's a city that would be attractive to people who come in with low levels of experience or low levels of skill? And then conversely, what would they have to offer? The reason I showed the pictures of Shenzhen is actually much closer to that kind of city than Dubai, for example. And what people do when they move to someplace like Shenzhen was work on assembly lines, work in factories, use eye-hand coordination, do manufacturing work. So they have a valuable service to offer. Right now in the world market, you don't get a very high wage for assembling garments or assembling iPads. But if a city was designed to be a very inexpensive place to live, low-cost public transport, low-cost apartments, somebody could come in, earn a wage, get the dignity and respect that comes from being self-sufficient, and with their wage, pay their rent, pay their transport. And then in a city and on the job, people acquire skills very rapidly. Ed Glazer, who's written a great new book on cities, if you're interested in cities, you should read. Ed has this sentence I love, or this phrase I love, which is, cities make us smarter. And that happens at all levels of the skill distribution. So in a place like Shenzhen, or go back to Hong Kong, think of Hong Kong in the 1950s. People did garments, they made toys. But in Hong Kong, they learned on the job by working in a firm, by having to coordinate with others, by having to try new tasks. They learned on the job. There was also more learning within the school system. And Hong Kong went very rapidly from the place to go to make the toys and the shirts to the place to go to do much more sophisticated things. And the toys and the shirts moved off someplace else, like Shenzhen. So I think these new cities that are going to grow up all around the world are going to be the places that these mobile industries are going to seek out for garment assembly, household goods, light manufacturing. And the market for all of those goods is going to be a lot bigger because there's going to be twice as many urban residents that are going to be looking to buy clothes and buy household materials. So this process can work very well. But it does mean that we have to plan for and accept a city which isn't going to look like Manhattan and isn't going to look like Dubai, but looks more like Hong Kong of the 50s.
I just want to synthesize what you have put forward as a vision of a vision of a new city of 10 million people against all the questions that we have heard from the floor. Can I offer you Abu Dhabi as a new city of 10 million people? Because the reason I ask is because it has satisfied some of the problems, or at least does not have some of the problems that you mentioned about sanitation, about crime, about transportation problems. It doesn't have, that's all. It's at the very early cycle of of the city history. And I think Abu Dhabi, in some sense, has already started building a brand new city within the city, which is called Mazda. The rules are different.
Yep.
And I think in terms of economic opportunities, like the gentleman, the first person who asked the question, is reasonably good life. So perhaps it will have a better chance of succeeding than, let's say, Honduras.
Yeah.
Thank you. What's your comment on that one? Thank you.
Well, it's very relevant to come talk about these issues here, because Dubai especially was thinking about this early on, and now other parts of the region, or like Abu Dhabi, are in a sense kind of playing catch up and repositioning themselves in the market a little bit. Abu Dhabi doesn't want to look exactly like a clone of Dubai, and is thinking about a little bit more like the middle market. I don't think Abu Dhabi has as its vision right now being the place like Shenzhen, where millions of people could come in and do garment assembly. So I think of Abu Dhabi as a little bit more kind of in the middle market in this city kind of building business. And it's good to have a kind of an ecology of all of these different cities. But the reality is that the world needs hundreds of cities that can accommodate people who first go into something like garment assembly. Those places will probably have different kinds of configurations and layouts in terms of things like public transit. That most people in a city like that won't be able to afford a car, and the apartments will be smaller. So I think that again, and in a market of 3 to 5 billion, there's lots of room for lots of entrants and lots of cities that grow. So success here does not in any way limit the potential for success in Honduras. So I think they can all grow quite rapidly.
Am I audible? Yeah. I'm sorry, I have to apologize right at the beginning because what I say might sound a little bit rude. So.
Academics are always rude.
Yes, exactly. So
I'll feel right at home.
Give me that latitude. I have three. I'm going to synthesize and say just three things that I sort of disagreed with. The first is, I think during your whole presentation, you seem to have oversimplified the idea of a city. You seem to have gone with this notion of, right from the beginning, you had this binary thinking of either it's a Jakarta or it's a Chicago. I've been to both, and there are slums in Chicago, and there are Michigan avenues in Jakarta. Yep. People move to Jakarta to work, and Indonesians move from Jakarta to work. So there's a very complex economic reason for cities, which seems to have been overlooked in this presentation. The second thing is your main argument is about new cities, whereas almost all of the major cities you mentioned are growing and suburbanizing and just becoming larger cities. So that seems to contradict yourself there. And the third thing, which I found almost slightly offensive, was this idea that this site in Honduras should abandon its own laws, abandon its own institutions, because they don't know how to make right cities or correct laws, and they should go to the United States or the United Kingdom and import their laws and plan their cities according to those institutions, which is so fundamentally undemocratic. And it's not surprising that you mentioned Singapore and Shenzhen, which is, well, yeah, I know where you're getting your model from. This is like the World Bank on steroids. So that's all I need to say.
So to summarize, my model of cities is binary rather than complex. The second point was, I'm trying to remember your 3 points. The second point was,
the first thing was oversimplification. The third thing was that the major cities of the world are growing, and then the third thing is that the importing institutions is undemocratic.
Right. So I think, even if it doesn't come through in the presentation, I think I appreciate how complex cities are. But just as you can think about, firms are also very complex. You can still think about creating the conditions that allow startup firms to come in. And it doesn't mean that I or a central planner has to know what's going to happen in a firm if we say we're going to have startup firms. In the same way, I think you can say that it would be good for the world if we allowed entirely new startup cities, and interesting, rich, complicated dynamics will emerge there. It is true that almost all of the growth in the world right now is coming in existing cities, but that means that it's time to stop and ask this question about, do we want to go down that track, or do we want to try something different? So my argument is that it's feasible to do something different, And there are big advantages that would come from doing something different. The best illustration of the advantage is that a lot of the growth in urban populations right now, especially the growth coming from developing countries, is under conditions where people go as second-class citizens. You just look all over the world, places are coming up with temporary worker programs, programs that just bring in adults, though you can't bring in the whole family. So the problem is that there's not enough competition for those workers. The package that's being offered to them is very unattractive, but their circumstances are so dire that they still take it. So I think we need to innovate and not just go along business as usual, but have these new places that would compete. And the best indicator of success would be that they become cities which, instead of treating the existing residents as the top of the caste, and then the new residents come in as lower caste temporary workers, that new cities grow in a sense where everybody is included. That'll be the sign of success. And it's an empirical question whether these new cities will do that, but I think they will. On the rules in Honduras, here I think you have to respect the wishes of the Hondurans. So they want to create this new city. They want to use this as a startup that lets them change aspects of their rules that they know are not the kind of rules that create the kind of society they want to live in. And many Hondurans vote with their feet by taking the death train through Mexico to get to the United States to go to a different place. So I think it's perfectly reasonable for the Honduran government and the broad political spectrum in Honduras to say, why can't we make a place like a Los Angeles right next door on this empty land? And what would it take to do that? One of the things it will take to do it is to persuade investors in the port and the airport to come in. Right now, Honduras went through a constitutional crisis just a few years ago. No investor, and the government understands this, people understand this, no investor is going to go put billions of dollars at risk in a new airport for Tegucigalpa under conditions where they know that there could be another round of political uncertainty in 5 years and the whole investment could be lost. So the Hondurans have simply said, what does it take to be competitive in this city building business, to bring in the resources we need to make it an attractive place? And they've concluded that something like the credibility of an external judicial system is exactly what they need to do this fast. So I think that even though it sounds unfamiliar and an inappropriate kind of discussion for those of us who are outside, I think you just have to respect the wishes of the people who are currently in Honduras and the people who currently leave Honduras to go, and many other places in Latin America, to get a better life. So.
Quick and simple question. Can you explain a little bit more how you foresee the capital expenditure being raised, and obviously very large amounts of money with very long payoff time?
Yeah.
If you can just expound on that, please.
Yeah. Well, the kind of competition that, say, the development authority for this new city will presumably run will be one where they take offers from various entities that might, for example, agree to build the airport. And the contract with the firm that builds the airport might be one where that firm gets a concession, they get the stream of landing fees that will come from that airport, and then they build an airport in the expectation of capturing fees that they'll collect for decades into the century. There is an enormous amount of wealth around the world right now which is looking for investment opportunities that will pay high returns and last for a very long time. Predictable, very durable, long-run income streams. There's just no better place to find those investment opportunities than infrastructure to service this unserviced market of the 3 to 5 billion people. The thing that's the bottleneck that keeps that from just happening automatically right now is this political risk I was alluding to a minute ago. That the problem, the advantage with the returns on infrastructure is they go on forever. The problem is they go on forever. And you can't take the project out with you if things turn bad in the country. You can take out like the sewing machines if you've got a garment assembly factory and then a place has political upheaval, and it's no longer an attractive place to do business. But you can't do that with infrastructure. So solving this political risk that people perceive is at the heart of creating the infrastructure. Again, it's this mutually beneficial exchange. The potential investors can get high returns, and the people in all of Latin America can get a place to go live and work where it's not congested, where there's a very modern sewer system, water system, power system, et cetera. So, and in a way, if you put yourself not in the position of Enrique and Nelson, but you think about people, say, running, say the sovereign wealth funds in this region, they're getting billions of dollars every month that they've got to figure out where to go invest in world markets right now. And in a sense, their problem is a dearth of investment opportunities. In a world where right now we're going through this big shift after the crisis, where all kinds of private and public actors have to save more, we're trying to increase saving, and the way the whole system works, if the whole world wants to save more, the whole world has to invest more. So that in some ways, the biggest macroeconomic midterm adjustment problem we face is insufficient investment demand. At the same time, we've got 3 to 5 billion people who want ports, airports, roads, power systems. They're just a perfect match of opportunity and mutual gain here, if we can solve this problem of a set of rules that make sure both sides benefit from this very long-term transaction.
I'd just like to make a comment on the evolution of the human urban project is obviously associated with many, many things. But you emphasize the idea, the greater cities grow, the bigger they grow, the greater the rules that evolve.
Mm-hmm.
And I recall Lewis Mumford in his famous book, The History of the City, he says that it's associated with control. In medieval cities, the kings and the rulers built big high walls and controlled their subjects. In the modern city, people, even if when they go to the suburbs and to far places from the city center, yet because the means of communication, the roads, all the systems that make their living possible are controlled by forces or structures they cannot see. So this aspect of control, even though millions of us flee towards it, yet we get captivated and controlled by it. And I think there's something in the human soul that, as much as we need the city to make use of its benefits that you listed, we also have an ambivalent attitude towards the city. That generalized sociological control. If you look at millions and millions of people in the tunnels and the subways and the coming out every morning in New York or Los Angeles, or you actually feel that immense sense of control and regimentation of the human life and the human condition. Thus, I think humanity in large, I mean talking general terms, have viewed the city with ambivalence. They love it and hate it. That's why there are now attempts to create the suburb and the gated communities, or flee from it when you retire, or go trekking and hiking, go back to nature. So I just invite your comments on these thoughts. Thank you very much.
So I think we'll always enjoy the amenities we can get from non-urban settings. So we'll always go vacation, experience non-urban settings. But I think we'll inevitably be drawn to cities as places to work, because there are just so many benefits from that. And on this issue of control, it's very clear that we have to coordinate much more carefully with each other when we're very densely interacting, and when we're trying to interact with many other people. So the best illustration of this is probably attention to the clock, and the idea that there are particular times at which things happen. Is something that we have to get used to if we're going to be effective residents in a city. That's not enforced typically by the police or the laws or the courts, but societies develop norms about punctuality that it's rude to show up late for a meeting that you've scheduled with other people. Or if you're a supplier in a logistics chain, if you don't deliver things on time, they'll just stop dealing with you as a supplier. So the kinds of control that come from this dense interaction and coordination are often this more subtle, soft control of norms about right and wrong and choice. Some of it, though, in preventing violence, like so Enrique doesn't get beat up and robbed and his teeth knocked out on the way to the United States. That's always going to involve some powers of coercion by the state. There, I think the best protection for individuals is to always have the choice to leave. That if I'm not happy with the way policing is working in Detroit, or if I'm not happy with the way policing is working in Singapore, I can leave and go live someplace else in the world. And you and I can do that. We just take that for granted. But again, the problem is all the people who don't even have a choice for whom Detroit would be a step up, let alone a choice between Detroit, New York, and Singapore.
My question would be about the feasibility of such a city that you were describing through time. Would the children of Enrique live in such a city, or would they move to a new ideal city? The other question is about the sense of belonging to a place. This is a city that is supposed to attract migrants, and not all kinds of migrants with low skills. So how would they develop this sense of belonging to this city? Thank you.
In places where people have a choice about where they live, you actually see quite a bit of mobility between different places. So Enrique might very well move someplace else if he had the kind of choice that I had in my lifetime. I grew up in Denver. I went to college in Chicago. I went to graduate school in Boston. I got my first job in Rochester, New York. I moved back to Chicago. I moved to California, and now I'm visiting this year in New York. That's the kind of freedom that I think you'd like to have for the kind of choice you'd like to have for everyone. And at different stages in your life. When you're a young person, the kind of city you might want is different than the kind of city you might want when you're a parent of some young children. And then later, when your children are grown up and have left, you might live in a different city. And the character of those cities, I think, will be different. They'll have different souls. But competition between all those places and free mobility, I think, will be a good force, one that will keep us going to places that are well ordered and well structured, but still make us feel like we've got choices about where to go. The only practical problem that I think you do have to face is how to, in a place that grows quickly, how to build a kind of shared experience and agreement about certain kinds of norms. Different places end up with different norms, and there has to be some kind of thought about what kind of a place do we want to be. And I think the way that will play out is just like a startup firm. What kind of city do we want this to be? What kind of rules do we put in place there? That will attract people that are interested in that kind of city, and then that'll determine its character. And we might well see some cities that grow up that are kind of ethnically homogeneous. We might see other cities that grow up that are much more cosmopolitan. Different people will be attracted to those different cities. But the people who help develop those new cities will have to think in the beginning, what kinds of things do we have to do to build common experience and common shared norms? And there's a very interesting discussion that is taking place about things like national service programs or compulsory education, which is part of the ways that societies built shared values and shared norms, even when they attracted people from many different backgrounds. So I think you'll see some very interesting experimentation along these lines in these various new cities. And some of them will be much more successful than others. Some of them will be much more vibrant cities than others. But at the minimum, they'll offer opportunities that just dramatically exceed what was available to Enrique or to Nelson. It's just not that hard to make a city where people have electric light in their houses. And it's not that hard to have a place where you're not going to get beaten up, you're not going to get kidnapped, and held for ransom. And we've got the chance to do it, so we should do it. Thanks.